All right. All right. Yeah, so with that, following Remus on the piece, I think we're going to follow up on his triad there of trust, context, and value. We'll segue right into this presentation here about the digital lighthouse. The big part is how to build trust and what happens when you don't get trust in all the right places. So with that, we'll jump right in. The big core belief of all of this is that the more you see, the more you can improve. If you can't see it, you can't improve it. And when you walk into the factory as a outside help, or whether it's a team within the factory at the end user at a corporate level or an outside integrator or something of that nature, you are coming into somebody else's domain. You're not there every day. You're not a part of the team. And a big piece of that is how do you gain that trust quickly and rapidly so that they can afford you the context so that you can then understand and provide that value that's coming later. The metaphor we're using for this is what we're calling the fog. You can't see it because it's hidden. And what we're calling the fog, it's not that you don't have data. We've been collecting it for 10 years. Remus talked about that quite a bit. 20 years, 30 years for some customers. We've got dozens of data stores. We've got historians and SQL databases, MES, and everything all scattered throughout the factories. We've got multiple systems, all the different acronyms. There's too many to count and name that have their own data that they're generating. And it's not a lack of investment. We've been running these initiatives forever. Since well before there was anything digital, we've been running the processes and the procedures to try to generate value with things we don't see. So the fog that we're talking about here is the disconnection. It's the different silos and the disconnection between them. So the ERP and its consumers are seeing one source of truth at the C-suite. There is the lag behind that, and the MES is showing them another one at the site level. And with that, they don't talk the same language. So the MES in that meeting, people looking at that are going to come into the meeting with these numbers saying that this is the truth. And the people who are just looking at the ERP are going to say that's the truth. And they're going to argue with each other over whose numbers are right, whose data is correct. And they're not measuring the same things in the same way. One thing Remus mentioned earlier was some people don't like OEE and others do. It's partially because nobody's calculating it the same way. OEE, when you're doing it the same as everybody who's talking to, is a great KPI that can point you in the right direction. But if everyone's calculating it differently at different layers of the same business, you're going to be talking and arguing about something that isn't actually the same thing that you mean. With that, the SCADA is the same story. So the operational reality, the telemetry data that you see on site might not match what the MES sees, which might not match what the ERP sees. And if they do, you're lucky because they're disconnected, siloed datas, and coincidentally, it worked out for you this time, but usually it won't. So if you're trying to look at the whole picture and you're looking at each of these silos, and more specifically one or the other, you're only going to see a disjointed mess of disconnected systems and different realities and different truths for different people in the organization. So it's not that people aren't working hard. It's not that people don't have the right intent. It's that they're not living in the same worlds, even though they're sitting on the same plant. And with that, we're going to go even deeper. The fog that we're talking about here is not a technical limitation. Most of the sites we go to, if they have done this before, if they have the data stores and they've done the initiatives and they've spent the investment, they have some sort of technical architecture in place. They might have a bunch of connections. They might have a SCADA system in place or a full IoT platform and maybe point-to-point and disconnected, but it exists somewhere. And if it doesn't, that's the first step, but we'll let the other speakers get into that when they start telling you how to actually deploy it. Brian's going to go deep into that. So with that, a lot of people think they need a better system. They think they need more data, and they think they need more rules. And with that, the rules you don't need more rules, you need cohesiveness. You don't need more data. You need things that connect that data and add context to and make that data valuable. And the systems you have in place might be good enough. They might not be 4.0. They might have been installed 10 years ago, but you can probably connect to them and you can probably generate value. Remus's example of the machine from 1946, I've only gone as far back as the 50s, but they're out there and you can still connect them. SCADA systems that were installed in the 90s still have OPC connections. You can get gateways and bridges, and you can bridge that with various gateways and middlewares that can connect to things like Hive and other IoT platforms that can then add all the extra context and make these connections in the cloud later. So because of this, all of our information is on site. It's somewhere, whether it's in somebody's head, in somebody's notebook, or in a database, it's there. People know what they know. And realistically, that's by design. An organization without silos is an organization that doesn't have any expertise. Silos aren't inherently a bad thing, but they shouldn't be disconnected and disjointed. You have people get territorial. Everybody has their domain, and they want to protect that domain. People want to feel important. People want to feel valued. And if you come in and start fighting against that too hard, people are going to push back, because not because of anything technical, but because that's their life. And sometimes they feel threatened by the new technologies that are coming in. And it's hard to convey to them sometimes. And the trick is to show them how this adds to their value, and rather than detracting from it. And with that, the metaphor there is that you can't clear the fog by adding more moisture. You need to clear it by changing the environment. And with that, I kind of went over this a little bit already, but the fog is human. The reason we can't see things aren't structural or technical. They are friction created by humans and emotions. The big four that we see most of the time is mistrust, defensiveness, territorial hoarding, and just general misunderstandings. So it's a human reaction to a structure that's broken that really doesn't allow people to do their best. So going deeper down this problem, the cost of living in the fog is that there are dozens of data sources, as we've already identified. How do we connect them? Who knows about them? How do we even identify that they exist? I mean, how many times have we walked into a factory and not known that this database or this historian was even there? And that's what held all the data. You don't learn that without talking to the people and gaining that trust first. You have different dashboards. Some of them might be calculating OEE through different technologies, different point solutions, sometimes on the same plant, sometimes between multiple plants. And they might not all be calculating OEE the same way. So we have multiple dashboards, we have the data, but does that data mean the same thing even if it has the same words? And so because of all of this disconnection and this general distrust and these reactions, we're still making decisions blind at a higher level. So yeah, the big things there is that transformation, digital or otherwise, die very quickly when people don't live in the same reality, when they're not working towards the same goal. And that's where we get to the piece of the lighthouse here, the name of the presentation. The lighthouse that cuts through the fog and lets us see the things that we didn't even know were there. This is how we generate the context to gain the trust. And there's a whole loop there of you gain the context that gets you the trust builds more context, and you start to grow from there. And once you have that loop going, that's when you can identify the value, that's when you can provide the value, and that's when you can really build and move forward. So the lighthouse reveals what's there, it shows you what's actually happening, reveals the patterns, and more importantly, it enables you to act on the information you see so that you can actually provide value. So with that, some of the benefits of the lighthouse are that what becomes possible because of it. It allows you to see in real time. You got the guy on the floor, the operator, who always knows this, and they think they're right, they might be wrong, but as Remus said with the quality check, you get this process engineer thinks this is the problem and they're adamant about it. This controls engineer knows that that's the problem. I'll probably stop here and tell a quick story of an actual time on site where we were trying to find some value. Is that we were quoting a project for a company. This one was a feed mill specifically. We were on site to do the proposal, doing a site walk, talking to the operators and the management, and just get general data collecting so that we could get an accurate proposal for an MES system and a control system we were quoting for them. We had about an extra hour or two to kill between the time we were done with that and when we had to get to the airport for the flight. So we could have just gone to the airport, but we were kind of bored. What do we do? And as we were walking out the door, the operator pulls us aside, and the manager's been complaining about this machine for a while. So we're like, yeah, we'll take a look for you. Why not? We're here. And we start looking at this thing. It was a big 1950s block press that was originally all hydraulic, had two different PLC retrofits with different sensors and HMIs over the decades. No comments in the code, very low level, typical stuff. We found a 20-year-old IO list that gave us enough context to get started, and conversations with the operator to build that. And we didn't really know it at the time, but through these conversations with the operator, we were building this trust that ended up having the effect all the way through the project, all the way to the end, where We got in, we started looking at the code, we started playing with stuff, we found something wrong in the code, I quickly deleted and changed a quick wrong, and everything was great in the PLC, and the problem was about half fixed. And so then we had a little bit more time, I got under the press, it got a little dirty, they probably didn't like me on the airplane after this, but we started noticing that when this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and these events that the operator told us, when this happens, it fails, were true. And despite the code change, we were still seeing some problems. And then we could see on the gauges of the hydraulic lines that it wasn't working. There was some erratic, it just didn't have pressure to keep moving forward. So in this process, we identified and fixed a code problem. And we identified and didn't have the tools to fix the hydraulic problem, but put them in touch with somebody who could. And as we were doing that, I heard the operator that I'd been talking to this whole time, who showed me how the machine worked, showed me which sensors were being tripped, what did or didn't work, or what was supposed to happen, because he worked on this press before it stopped working too, told me the story of the last 4 people that they had hired to look at this machine. The first one was their internal controls team for their corporate staff. They came in, spent a couple hours looking at it, swore on their life that this was a mechanical problem. Age-old story, they walked away. So they brought in their maintenance team. They looked at this machine and did the same thing. Hydraulics look good. It's clearly a controls problem. So then they hired an outside integrator. Same story. They hired an outside hydraulic company. Told them the same thing. Everyone just pointing fingers, only knowing their little context and their piece of the puzzle. And the kicker at this was, after we solved the problem, finding it was a code problem and a mechanical problem, the operator told me that I was the first person of all 4 of these teams to even talk to him. Nobody else started by building trust or even gaining the context of what used to happen, what was supposed to happen. And that's a quick example of this at a very small level, one troubleshooting one machine over a couple hours, but it takes effect in a much bigger way the further up the stack you get. And the same story holds true whether we're doing an ERP integration or a PLC troubleshooting. And the benefits of that were, when we ended up doing the whole project, we already had the trust of the operators. That story had gotten around, people knew we were there to help, and they would open up. They would talk to us. What are your problems? What doesn't work? What didn't work? What does work? What do you love to do? And what works really well? And so when we're developing this new system, implementing this new technology, and connecting their whole factory, we were doing so with the help of the operation, of the operators, of the managers. We had the CTO on board. Everybody was excited to work with us and excited for what could happen next, because we built that trust. And every time we built trust, we got more context, which led to more trust, which led to more value, and it just compounds from there. So yeah, but then you get your Lighthouse, you can see what's happening, you've gained that trust, you have extra context, and with that comes some temptations that can quickly derail you, that look really good in the moment. And we'll start talking about some of those here. The first one, and the biggest one, is you never get started because you're trying to be too perfect. This goes into the approach that Remus already kind of stole a bunch of my presentation already in his Q&A, but the whole approach of start with a problem, start with a business case, call it good enough, and just move. If you spend too much time modeling too much data up front, you're never going to get started. The budget's going to get blown. People are going to get upset, and they're either never going to do it. They're going to fall back on a comfortable old solution that may or may not meet their needs. More often than not, it doesn't. And you can scare them away from the entire data ops and all the value this can bring, because it was just too much for them. And so the big thing there is to move fast. Don't let it be too perfect. Just be good enough to solve problems, provide value today, and we can start iterating as we go forward. The other one is, once you can see things, you have a lot of decisions to make. How do you know which one of these engineers are telling you the true story? And maybe they all have which one of these problems that you want to focus on now. Do you want to focus on their problem, or their problem, and where does that fit in the larger business? Which one is the highest priority? Which one has the highest ROI? Which one has the most political capital that might gain you more trust, even though it doesn't have the highest ROI, that helps to build the coalition and get things moving faster? With that, the other one is, too many people start with technology. It's the whole customer calls, it says, I want a UNS. That's a technology. They say, I want you to implement this, or I want you to implement that. If they don't know why they want that, they just saw a video online, or they saw a cool ad on LinkedIn, then You need to get to the bottom of why do you want this? And sometimes they have a valid reason. Sometimes they've done their research, but more often than not, they haven't. So with that, you have to have the use case first, know what value you're providing, and then find the right tools for the job to complete it. Then the other one that happens is you start to see the data. Your middle management, your VPs, your plant managers start to say, now that I see this, everything's wrong, everything's messed up, and we need to change everything. And they're going to just start mandating, you need these data models, you need this exactly like this, we're measuring these KPIs in this way. And sometimes they'll even enforce, you're going to use these objects in the PLC, you're going to use these on the HMI, and you can't do anything else. And they get pushed back. And by doing that, you eliminate and lose all of the trust that you started with, that you worked so hard to get in the first place. The counter to that is, if you don't have any mandates, you don't have any reason to do what you're doing, and you don't know the value, and you're just solving the problem that you have right now in the moment, you might be able to provide some value for you and your team right now as the frontline worker, but you don't know where that fits in the larger initiative. So if you start too far on the top down, pushing things down people's throat and just saying deal with it, you're going to lose trust, you're going to lose buy-in, and no one's going to want to work with you. But if you start from the bottom and don't know where you fit in the organization, you're also going to fall apart sometimes, because the next site might be doing the same thing and they're doing it differently and nobody's working together. It's just different silos. So the real danger is building a lighthouse that shows you everything but doesn't actually change anything. It's the old adage of the UNS just becomes another silo, and it might be a bigger silo, a fancier silo, but it's still a silo if you do it wrong. So with that, the piece there is that the UNS the UNS is a tool that we use, not a solution in and of itself to provide it. But whether or not we're using the UNS or another data ops platform or something else, it's about how we organize the data within it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the exact models we need at the ERP. We're going to remodel everything 20 times depending on who's looking at it, where it is. It's not going to end up being a simple hierarchy like you think, and things will change depending on who's looking at it and why you care in this moment. So the Unified Namespace or any other data ops platform will provide a common language to at least your domain. It will provide an event-driven flow. It'll provide some of that context, some of the insights that you didn't know were a thing yet. And basically for the telemetry data, it will allow you to subscribe to things where some of the old legacy systems and before data ops platforms were a thing required you to pull in very slow intervals. So it allows for real-time information of the telemetry a little bit further up that stack and that concern. And this is the big one right here, is the Unified Namespace is a direction. So if we're talking about it as a tool that we implement, people often talk about it as like an MQTT broker, and there's too tight of a coupling there. And that's probably the biggest misconception of the Unified Namespace, is it's not just an MQTT broker. It's the principles that we just talked about the contextualization, the hierarchy, the common language. But more importantly, at one layer deeper of an abstract, the Unified Namespace is a direction. It's the approach you're taking. It's where you're pointing. It's just a general thing that you're doing. And the outcome is not a UNS. The outcome is the value you're providing, the KPIs you're generating, the decisions that are being made on the context that you're providing with it. And so with that, there isn't a single source of truth. You might have one UNS, you might have 10 UNSs, you might have a UNS on every site, different domains. There isn't really a single source of truth at the end of the day, and there shouldn't be. Part of that perfectionism, if you're trying to push everything into one single UNS as one single source of truth that's too perfect and tries to meet everybody's needs, it'll get too big. The models will become either too cumbersome to manage or too loose to be valuable. So just build this unified namespaces, build the connections that you need to solve your problems, and later in the stack, when we get into enterprise IT and things of that nature, we can go a little bit further and go deeper. You will need gateways. Legacy stuff doesn't speak MQTT, we all know that, but a lot of the new stuff doesn't either. There's very few cases where you're going to be able to plug MQTT into your ERP, for example. And you're very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to connect MQTT to your PLC, regardless of how modern they are. So you're going to need gateways on both sides that provide those integration points. It's not a simple hub and spoke. It's not going to be a clean star topology that just looks perfect on paper. It's going to be a messy diagram of connections through gateways that work, but it's not going to be as perfect as you might want them to be on paper. It's much more of a mesh or a graph if you really think about it. And so yeah, back to that big temptation is the UNS is not about achieving a academically perfect architecture or an academically perfect data model. It's just about getting things together so you can move forward and just solve problems as fast as you can. But with that, we need to talk about red and blue namespaces. So traditionally, when you think about the unified namespace, you're thinking about it from a site level, bottom-up approach, grassroots movement, find the problem, solve it, and move fast. That all exists in the blue namespace at the edge. That might be a whole site, it might be a line, it might even be one department or concern within that organization. But the blue namespace, the traditional UNS we all talk about, is the reality on the site. It is the telemetry data, it's the transactions, it's the historical data, and more importantly, it's really limited to the scalar data in most cases. But with that, the blue namespace, your traditional UNS, allows you to do whatever works for you locally so you can provide as much value on your site as possible. OT typically owns this, regardless of what you call that. It's going to be somewhere under the COO's domain, depending on how the org is structured. But it allows you to move fast and innovate at the edge and solve problems that may eventually be elevated to the red namespace as we talk. That is where we start having structured data models. That's where we are reporting up through the CIO or the CTO with common structured data, IT-ready platforms, usually in the cloud, very structured, very strict, and very rigid for a purpose. Anything in that red namespace, you're comparing apples to apples. If you're comparing OEE to OEE from site A to site B in the red namespace, you know you're calculating OEE the same way. But if you're comparing OEE from the red to the blue, you probably need to look twice and double check how it's being calculated because they're moving fast. They might not be calculated the same as you. And that's all by design. The red namespace is very structured, very clean, and very strict because that's what we need for business intelligence. That's what we need for contextualization with a lot of traditional AI and ML models. And the key to all of this is that your transformation is about building a bridge between these namespaces. This is where the real UNS comes in. This is where our data ops and our platforms come in as the bridge between these two worlds. And either one of these, if it takes too much, will disrupt the other. And it's just two levers, one lever being pulled in one direction, and you got to find that balance in the middle. And every organization is going to have a slightly different balance. We're probably going to get to the Q&A where you're going to ask me a lot of questions where I say it depends, and it's because it's a spectrum of where do you need it to be. But it's going to be between these two poles in one way or another. And then the next slide here is a quick one. How do we build a unified namespace? And I'm going to defer that to Brian in his presentation coming later. We're going to stay in the abstract here. So through the culture of this, we talked a little bit about top-down and bottom-up approaches to the namespaces and the data itself, but also from a trust building and a cultural and an organizational perspective. If you're building from the bottom up, you're innovating fast, and there is no mandate from the top. There is no buy-in from the executive team, and you're just truly operating in isolation, which a lot of digital transformations do, especially centered around the UNS. You're eventually going to walk up that flight of stairs and find there's nowhere else to go. You are going to find that on the plant floor, you know what the constraints are, you know which machines are problematic, and you know what patterns happen, you know the quality and the maintenance structures, and you know where the value is or isn't being generated, and you know what works on the site, for the site, but you don't know what resources, you don't have the resources that you need to scale those solutions. You don't have the place for experimentation. You don't have a budget for R&D. You're just working with what you have on the operational space, and everything is live in production. And the biggest one is you don't usually have the translation to understand the larger initiatives at the site level, at the enterprise level. What is that North Star? What is that KPI that the entire organization is optimizing for? What is the CEO pushing right now? And if you don't have that context, you might be moving in a really good direction that nobody else cares about. The biggest problem that you face on the front lines might be one of the smallest problems that the enterprise as a whole is facing. And as we build the trust, we can start to identify these and have these conversations in a way that don't alienate, where yes, you're struggling with this right now, but this is costing 10x more, and we'll get to you later. We got to solve this first. And so with that, if you don't have the resources, the recognition, the buy-in from the executives, the leadership, whether it's the site manager or the CEO, depending on how big or small this initiative is, you might move as fast, you might provide a lot of value, but nobody else is going to know. You might have a very successful UNS implementation on your site, and the next site over might too, but the other site in Germany might be doing something very different, and it may or may not work, and the site in Brazil might have the same problem. Now you've got 4 sites that may or may not be providing different value. They may or may not have what they're calling a unified namespace. They may not have digitally transformed. But when the CIO comes and says, I need to manage these vendor relationships, I need to make sure this stuff is secure, and I need the standard data that we can use for our enterprise KPIs, nobody's speaking the same language. So we might have unified some silos down here, but if we do it and going in the wrong direction, it's going to get thrown out because the guys who control the budgets at the end of the day didn't buy into it. So with that, typically the failed bottom-up approach from an enterprise perspective, which may have looked like a really good approach from the site perspective, will usually lead to everything you did being thrown away, another platform coming in, probably from a very large company that will promise a single throat to choke. They will come in, mandate, overcorrect, and say, this is what you're going to do now. And they're going to put in safer platforms that sound better on paper, that will promise cohesiveness, security, and strategical alignment, whether or not they can execute. But the pendulum will have swung the wrong way, too far, because you started too far over here. It's going to come over, and it'll take time to settle back in the middle. So leadership knows the strategy. They know what resources, and they have the ability to allocate those resources in a way that no site does. And they can change the strategy. They can change the entire teams to remove barriers to move really fast if wanted and needed. But they don't know what's happening on each site at the ground level. They don't understand the value of the shadow innovations happening on the site level, and they don't have the trust from the people on the plant floor. I mean, I'm sure some of us have seen the CEO walking the plant floor and all the jokes that the maintenance guys and the operators make about the guy in the suit. There's no trust there. They are trying to work towards the same goal, but they're in different worlds talking about different things in different ways, and they usually don't connect very well. So the big joke there is that without operational truth, you're coming from the top down, you're eventually going to hit the concrete. So what do we need to make this work is the trust from both. We need the trust and the buy-in from the site as well as the leadership teams. We need to allow the truth to shine from the ground level. That's the whole data ops we're talking about here. That was all Remus's great pieces where he was showing the timelines and the types of data and how it flows from the real-time data to the month-by-month data, even the annual once-a-year data and KPIs. But we need to get that truth into a way that the leadership can understand and comprehend, and in a way that matters to them, so we're not just providing them extra noise. The bottom-up allows everything that it did there. It can innovate fast, it knows what's going on, and it can recognize the patterns faster than anybody else can. It's all about giving the right people the right data at the right time. But we also need the buy-in from the top down, the leadership team of varying levels, depending on who you're working with and what level of the organization, to give you the resources, the funds, the time, and the space to actually do any of these things. And more importantly, when you're working together and you're on the same page and you're speaking the same language now, those strategical initiatives that we didn't know on the plant floor are now known to everybody, and everything we do can work towards them. So it's not, hey, we're not doing your thing right now, too bad. It's, hey, we're not doing your thing right now because we're doing this, and do you want to help? And everybody can get buy-in, everybody can have ownership of something, and we might have kicked the can down the road on your exact problem, but you're helping solve this, and everybody feels good now. So it's about building an engine that can last. And I forgot to put a headline on this one. That's fun. Yeah.
It is a better headline.
It is. It is. But yeah, this one was supposed to have a headline that talked about the river and how the UNS and data ops provides a river that lets data flow from the ground floor back up to the enterprise and even back down so we can get the strategies. It's getting the flow, it's allowing the expertise to thrive, and it's allowing innovation. So typically what we're missing to allow this river to flow is we're building dams because we don't have the right architecture. But more importantly, people on the site level, because there isn't that trust, will lack the courage to speak up, to identify that this is where we need to remove a barrier or this is where we can provide value. They're in their day-to-day, they're doing their task, and they don't trust that they will be listened to when they talk. So once we've generated that trust, we've built this cycle of trust to context to value, and we just keep iterating through this cycle. That's when we have the lighthouse that allows us to keep seeing more and more and more until eventually we have the river flowing how it needs to flow. And the biggest takeaway from all of this is we're talking about digital transformation. It's not a choice. You're going to transform one way or the other, whether you want to or not. The question is, are you going to do it consciously, and are you going to choose where you go? Are you going to grow towards where you want to be, or are you going to decay into something else? So with that, the quick one here I saved for the end in case I took too long is I'm Dylan with Abelara. We'll finally do the intro at the outro here. Abelara's approach to all of this before we get into the KPIs is to meet you where you are, whether that's in the boardroom or on the shop floor. Is to start with constraints and identify problems that we can solve, not a catalog of proven solutions, which we also have, but we don't bring those into play until later once we know what problems we need to solve. And it's about building capability within internal teams, not dependency on us as an integrator. So the big thing for us is we celebrate the most and take the most pride when you don't need us anymore and you can do these initiatives yourself. We get the flywheel moving, we get the cycle going, and then we leave because you can take care of it from there. So we say our job is to create the conditions that empower you, your people, and your culture so that you can transform yourselves. And that's where we get down to questions. Yeah.
So first off, fantastic prezo, really impressive. Curious about maybe your experiences with bringing UNS into manufacturing. So at Toyota, big challenge. This is our 10th generation of trying to do modeling, so we understand the pitfalls. The first experience we bring to the controls engineer to the floor is, we're going to build a UNS, a data model, and that immediately, the question is, what's a UNS? And how you describe a UNS suddenly becomes a computer science topic, right? Object-oriented programming is the core of a UNS.
Yep.
And that's when the deers and the headlights get turned on. And it is very hard to explain object-oriented programming and adopt that at a floor level. But if you do not, if you say just build a messy UNS, then you really have done yourself, now you're in a real mess. So I'm just curious how you are able to.
So I've got three answers depending on who I'm talking to in the organization. If I'm talking to the data scientists and the programmers in the IT teams, it is object-oriented programming and it's a type of event-driven architecture. Nobody else in the organization needs to hear that because nobody will care. If I'm talking to the leadership teams, people who care about the annual KPIs, whether it's the CEO, the VP, or the president of a business unit, it is all about ROI. It is all about eliminating waste and increasing efficiencies in various ways. And this is just the way to gain the insights to the plant floor that most people don't have right now. So the biggest common thing we find with, say, a president of a business unit for a larger organization is that they don't know what's happening on the plant floor. They're going into reviews with their reports and pitching their solutions to things, and they go in blind and they present a story that may or may not be true in their quarterly review. They get their ass chewed and nobody wants to hear about it. And they go back down the stream to their guys and all their VPs and say, I need you to figure this out. And the COO goes down, runs it down his chain of where do I get the data on the plant floor? And they've already hit it from the wrong direction because they're just trying to solve this one pointed problem. So the Unified Namespace reverses that problem to this audience and says, we're going to collect the data from the plant floor so that you, as the leadership, can make the informed decisions and see the things from the process that you can't already see right now without spending a month of your COO's time trying to chase down these problems and probably getting nowhere with it. If I'm saying what the UNS is to the site level engineering team, I'll probably never use the word UNS. We are doing data aggregation, data collection, analytics, things that you've already been doing. We're just doing so in a cohesive way that's not disconnected. Frankly, it may or may not be MQTT. Maybe it is HiveMQ, but it is a central platform and a central way of connecting things in a more decentralized
But
architecture.
don't they need to, the problem is they need to understand, right? Controls engineers don't like data models.
No.
Right? They want every machine to be unique.
Yes, and that's
But so you absolutely, it's like you can't abstract them from. That's the challenge we're having. It's like, I am sorry, but that model doesn't work. I know you want to do it that way.
and
but
that's why we have red and blue.
yeah. But what
That's-
if the blue changes? You can't hook the red to the blue if the blue is blurry, right?
The blue will change and be blurry, and it allows ownership and buy-in from the controls teams, while having this smaller mandate of saying, I need this data from your site, regardless of what you want to do. Do you want to use Ignition? Do you want to use Wonderware? Do you have a legacy SCADA system or nothing at all? Cool, do what you need to do to get that data, as long as you provide us to this endpoint in this structured way at the end of the day. And what this looks like is very structured, it's version controlled, it's very IT centric. But what happens over here, they can have 10 different machines if they want, or maybe we have some best practices we're suggesting and they can follow those. But if you try to mandate too far down the plant floor, you're going to get too deep into the weeds of egos and attitudes of controls
So then
engineers.
your data is wrong. That's the challenge we're having, because reds are easy to version control. Blue, if you say you don't have to, red hooks to blue, and if blue changes 10 times a day, red is unaware and it's not versioned, it becomes Toyota, the father of TPS, Tachiono, it was a great saying. He said this way before there were computers, right? Data is super important in manufacturing, but facts are way more important. So you end up collecting data but not facts, because blue keeps moving. And that's been our, because you're right, you have to let them, but if it moves.
You give them the flexibility to do blue, but then their responsibility is to map blue to red. So you have a purple shim between blue and red.
Who does that though?
You're mapping blue to red.
The guy in the middle has to have really good.
And this is the harder truth. Yep. This is the harder part of it, is coordinating these two. And this is where the answer of it depends is going to be on the organization. Somebody like Toyota probably needs a much larger red namespace than a smaller company would.
I think too, this is where the platform approach of like understanding how data lakes and data platforms come into play too, because with the introduction of the Snowflake into this world and stuff, and Databricks, whichever one you choose to use, the ability to adapt to the changing environment because of the tools that we have, like a connector between HiveMQ and Snowflake, allow us to build that connection, that purple shim, and not have to worry about making sure the context is exactly right every single time we do that, because it kind of gives us that bridge component, right? If you look at the traditional medallion architecture of a data lake, right? You have raw data, you have curated data, and then you have final data. So right, bronze, silver, gold. The goal is to land it in bronze. We don't need to understand completely the value of it generated at that point. If that's the goal, is to get it to the bronze, we can create that curation layer with the silver medallion that gives us the ability to build that purple shim, like Zach just said, right? It's like we can land all this raw data, because essentially the tags on the PLC will change. They always do, 100%. But it doesn't mean the intention of a lot of what that process is doing on the line is going to change, right? Automotive background, right? You're making a car. The process of making that car is essentially the same. The variables that change a lot of the times, but the overall data model of a vehicle, especially in this TPS world of stuff, I would imagine stays pretty much the same. And that way you can kind of create this adapting architecture of purple that allows your data science team to build whatever sort of application they need. You just have this raw mess of data. Look, I'll give you an example of one of the other big automotive manufacturers. They took the idea of this and they created a broker inside of every single factory. That broker has all of the data and it changes all of the time into that single on-prem broker. This allows any person that's trying to deliver an application for the factory connecting to that broker, and you have all the access to PLC data without ever having to go and talk to the controls engineer. That was their goal. They're like, we want to separate the world of the controls teams from the world of people that build these valuable applications. So we're going to connect all of these things to an on-prem broker, so we're not just streaming everything in the cloud. We're going to create this data access layer with the broker so that we have the ability to connect into that, and we know it changes all the time. So that's okay, because we're going to constantly be changing our applications as well. So that was one of the approaches that they took that worked pretty well. Now, there was a couple things they did there that was kind of silly, but the idea is...
It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's 100%.
Oh, yeah,
Most plants have more data that's trashed than good.
Oh,
And even today. And none of this fixes it, unfortunately. Like you say, that your both of your presentations really were, the non-technical portions were so dead on. I mean, that is none of this means anything. The stuff you all presenting has really been quite insightful.
Yeah, and I guess the really quick answer too, before we get to other questions, is in my experience, getting started, even with messy data, building that trust and that buy-in, eventually over time, those controls engineers who think everything's different come over and realize that there is some commonality that they need to enforce and see the value in it. So it's about earning the trust and proving the value to everybody and showing them, not telling them why we need more red and less blue.
So just one point
Yeah.
on the comment that you made about people don't want to, control engineers don't want to create models out of data because they want their machine to be unique, right? But the whole premise of doing like AI is you need some kind of a model, right? Models of different assets, so you can actually compare assets and things like that. And you have to start somewhere and then get to the uniqueness of what people want. So it has to be a bridge between what control engineers want and where we can get them through unified namespace and data modeling and so on.
And that's why we have to start with a actual use case and a business value and not just start with we need a UNS, because that use case or that starting use case and that starting value is going to determine, is it AI? Everything's going to be structured. We need exactly this.
Right.
Is it a plant floor? We just need a historian so we can trend some lines.
Yeah.
Then it's going to be very unstructured and just fast.
Exactly.
And then over time, you start building more use cases and it comes in the middle. And I'm oversimplifying, I know, it's not this simple.
No, it's-
But it takes a lot of time.
Exactly.
Because it's not a technical problem, it's a human one.
No, I mean, we've been doing AI for a decade.
Right.
We've been analyzing data through models, and you know how many AIs have given us definitive
Oh, yeah.
solutions to the problem, and then we found out we fed it data from the wrong line?
Yeah.
The AI
Yeah.
is 100%, just like you
Garbage
said,
in, garbage out.
I'm 100% sure that the problem is on this axle.
Yeah.
AI is just like that, so that stuff's
Yeah.
even scarier.
And none of the technology is new. That's part of the evidence of how it's a human problem. Is I know people who have implemented and proven that they've implemented modern MES solutions back in the 80s that were event driven and pub sub. So none of this is new. Yeah.
Yeah, and just one last point. So let's not forget the human in the loop, because everybody that sees AI, they'll be like, you know what, you can solve world hunger, but that's never the case. You always have to have the human in the loop that is providing feedback on everything that AI is doing, because they have like better knowledge than AI.
Yeah.
Because for AI, it's only like based on what you trained it on, and it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. I think we're a little bit over time here, but there's one more question.
I think we have time for one question left.
On the lighthouse, like it makes sense, it's lighting the way. But like what exactly is it? Can you describe what a lighthouse is? I know Remus talked about like it typically starts with a land floor walk, but how would you describe a lighthouse?
Yeah. So the quickest abstract, and I'll get into the deeper one, is everything Remus said about value, trust, context, value, in that order. And that you build the trust first, but before we can build the trust, we need context. So you get a little bit of a catch-22 here. Is it context, trust, value, or is it trust, context, value? It's both. You need to start somewhere. So generally, we need to get that context first, and we need to walk the plant. And in that initial plant walk, in that initial on-site meeting with the leadership team, or the maintenance team, and or the operators, ideally all of the above, that's when we can simultaneously gain the context, because the guys we're talking to on site already have it, and we can see it. Like you walk on a plant, and you're going to be able to see what's going wrong based on who's where everybody's hanging out, and what people are yelling about. The context is pretty evident. So you can get the context within 10 minutes on most plant floors. Then it's about how do you get the trust. And now it's pulling the information out of people that they don't necessarily know how to word for themselves, getting that, reframing it in a way that builds that context, and in a way that also builds the trust. And then from there, you can start the cycle.
Like it's like a 2-week pilot project. Like what is it? That's what I'm trying to.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
No, yeah, it's
That's
yeah,
how it
can
works,
be.
right? But
I mean, there's times where it might be a single day on site as part of a proposal, or it might be a 2 or 3 week project to really get in the weeds and just, maybe that first use case is we need a historian. Or it's, hey, we've already got 3 OSI Pi instances, we've got this Honeywell historian over here, and we can't connect things. Maybe the first project is just bridging that connection, and as part of that project, you're gaining that trust and context. So the entry point's different. I mean, some of the stuff we do is entry at the CIO level. So it's a very different life cycle if you're starting up there than it is if you're on the plant floor. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now we will have 30 minutes.